The sun hung heavy over the Wyoming frontier, a merciless orb scorching the cracked earth of Bitter Creek's town square. It was late summer, 1883, and the air shimmered with heat and judgment. A wooden gallows stood at the center, its timbers warped from years of neglect, the noose swaying faintly in a dry wind. Mara Tate, a widow of 32, stood atop the platform, her bare feet trembling against the rough planks. Her hands were bound behind her with coarse rope that bit into her wrists, leaving red welts on her pale skin. Her faded calico dress, once a soft blue, clung to her frame, tattered from months of scraping by. Her dark hair, streaked with early gray, fell loose from its braid, framing a face etched with defiance and despair. She didn't look at the crowd 24 townsfolk, their eyes hard, their murmurs sharp but at the wagon cage 20 feet away, where her 5 daughters huddled, their small hands gripping the bars. Lila, 12, held the youngest, June, who was barely 3, her tiny face buried in her sister's shoulder. Nora, 10, pressed against Ivy, 7, whose wide eyes darted from her mother to the noose. Tessa, 5, clung to Lila's skirt, her sobs muffled but piercing. Mara's chest tightened, each cry from her girls a knife twisting deeper. She had stolen a single loaf of bread from Baker Hollis's shop, a desperate act after days of watching her children's bellies hollow out. The town, lean from drought and failed harvests, saw no mercy in her motive. Theft was theft, and Bitter Creek's law was unforgiving. Sheriff Amos Reed stood below the gallows, his boots planted wide, arms crossed over a barrel chest. His gray mustache twitched as he scanned the crowd, daring anyone to challenge his authority. "Mara Tate," he barked, his voice carrying over the murmurs, "you've been found guilty of stealing. The penalty's clear. You'll hang before sundown." The crowd stirred, some nodding, others shifting uneasily. A woman in a bonnet whispered, "She's got 5 little ones." A man spat into the dust. "Should have thought of that before she turned thief." Mara's jaw clenched, but she kept her chin high. Tears traced paths down her cheeks, not for herself, but for the girls she'd leave behind. She'd already lost everything. Her husband, Daniel, crushed in a mine collapse 2 years ago. Their small plot of land, taken by creditors, and now her dignity, stripped bare on this platform. The worst had come when Reed's deputies tore her daughters from her arms that morning, their screams echoing as she was dragged to the square. No trial, no defense, just a loaf of bread and a town too tired of hunger to care. The executioner, a wiry man with a scarred cheek, stepped forward, his hand on the lever. The noose creaked, louder than the crowd's whispers. Mara's breath hitched, her gaze fixed on her daughters. Lila's lips moved, mouthing "Mama," her face pale but fierce. June's small hand reached through the bars, as if she could pull her mother back. Mara whispered, "I'm sorry," her voice lost to the wind. She wasn't sorry for the theft. She'd do it again to see her girls fed, but for the life she couldn't give them, the future she wouldn't see. Then, a voice cut through the tension, low and steady, from the edge of the crowd. "I'll pay her debt. Let her go." Heads turned, murmurs rippling like grass in a storm. Sheriff Reed's eyes narrowed, his hand dropping to the revolver at his hip. The speaker pushed through the crowd, unhurried, his boots scuffing the dirt. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his flannel shirt faded from sun and work, a battered hat shading his face. Caleb Harrow, a rancher who lived alone on the outskirts, was known to every man in Bitter Creek, but close to none. He owned a cedar ranch beyond the ridge, a place built with his own hands, empty since his fiancée, Sarah, died of fever 10 years back. His gray eyes, sharp but weary, locked on Reed. "Caleb," Reed said, his tone a warning, "this ain't your business. She broke the law." Caleb stopped at the base of the gallows, his gaze flickering to Mara. Her breath caught at the intensity in his eyes, not pity, but something deeper, like recognition. "She stole to feed her children," Caleb said, his voice calm but firm. "You hang her, you orphan, 5 girls. That's a heavier debt than bread." The crowd shifted, a few nodding, others muttering about justice. Reed's face reddened. The law don't bend for sob stories. You know that. That's civil. Caleb reached into his coat, pulling out a small pouch of coins. Then take this. Covers the bread, Hollis's trouble, and your time. He tossed the pouch at Reed's feet, the clink of metal loud in the silence. Reed stared at it, then at Caleb, his jaw working. The executioner hesitated, looking to the sheriff. Mara's heart pounded, her eyes darting between Caleb and her daughters. Why was this stranger risking himself for her? She didn't know him, had never spoken to him, yet here he stood, offering salvation when no one else would. A man in the crowd, a butcher with a stained apron, called out, "What's she to you, Harrow?" Caleb didn't answer, his gaze steady on Reed. The sheriff kicked the pouch, coins scattering in the dust. "You think you can buy her out of this? Sets a bad precedent." Caleb took a step closer, his voice dropping low. "You want a lesson for this town? Teach mercy, not blood. Let her live, and those girls keep their mother." The words hung heavy, stirring something in the crowd. The woman in the bonnet wiped her eyes, whispering to her neighbor. Reed's eyes flicked to the wagon, where Lila held her sisters close, her young face fierce with hope. He muttered under his breath, then nodded to the executioner. "Cut her down." The crowd gasped as the executioner sliced the rope. Mara's knees buckled, her body collapsing to the planks, breath tearing into her lungs. The coarse rope fell away, and she clutched her wrists, raw and bleeding. Caleb climbed the platform, offering a hand. She stared at it calloused, steady, the hand of a man who worked alone. Hesitating, she placed her trembling fingers in his. He pulled her up, gentle but firm, his touch grounding her. The wagon cage was opened, and the girls spilled out, running to Mara. Lila reached her first, throwing her arms around her waist, her face buried in Mara's dress. Nora and Ivy pressed against her sides, Tessa's small hands gripping her skirt. June toddled forward, sobbing, and Mara scooped her up, holding her tight. The crowd began to disperse, some muttering about justice, others about miracles. Reed watched, his face unreadable, before turning away. Caleb stood back, giving Mara space, his hat low over his eyes. "Thank you," Mara whispered, her voice raw, barely audible over June's hiccups. Caleb nodded, his expression unreadable. "Don't owe me thanks, just keep them safe." He glanced at the girls, his eyes softening for a moment before hardening again. "Come with me. My ranch is a mile out. You'll have a roof tonight." Mara hesitated, her instincts screaming caution. She didn't know this man, didn't know his motives, but the alternative, staying in a town that had nearly killed her, was no choice at all. She nodded, clutching June closer. The girls followed, their small hands linked, their eyes wide with fear and wonder. Caleb led them to his wagon, a sturdy rig hitched to 2 bay horses. The townsfolk watched in silence as Mara helped her daughters climb aboard, their thin frames dwarfed by the wooden bench. Lila sat beside Mara, her hand never leaving her mother's arm. Caleb took the reins, his movements deliberate, and the wagon rolled out of the square, dust rising in its wake. The road stretched wide and empty, flanked by sagebrush and distant hills. Mara's heart raced, her mind a tangle of fear and gratitude. She glanced at Caleb, his profile sharp against the fading light. His silence was a wall, but his actions spoke louder. A man who'd risked his reputation, maybe more, for a stranger. Why? She didn't ask, not yet. Her daughters' soft breaths, their warmth against her, were enough for now. The gallows shadow lingered, but for the first time in months, a fragile hope flickered in her chest. They were alive. They were together. And this man, this stranger, had given them a chance to stay that way. The Wyoming dusk painted the sky in hues of amber and bruised purple as Caleb Harrow's wagon creaked along the rutted trail to his ranch. Mara Tate sat rigid on the bench, June's small body curled in her lap, the 3-year-old's breath soft but uneven from crying. Lila, Nora, Ivy, and Tessa pressed close beside her, their thin frames jostling with each bump. The girls were silent, their eyes darting between the endless plains and Caleb's broad back, his hands steady on the reins. Mara's wrists still ached from the gallows rope, the raw skin a reminder of how close she'd come to losing everything. Her heart churned with a mix of gratitude and suspicion. Caleb's mercy had saved her, but trust was a luxury she couldn't afford, not after a town had turned its back, not after years of scraping by alone. The ranch came into view as the trail curved past a grove of cedar trees, their sharp scent mingling with the cooling air. The cabin was sturdy but plain, its timber walls weathered by wind and time, a wide porch wrapped around the front, a single lantern flickering above the door. Beyond the house stretched a barn, a corral with 2 horses, and fields dotted with sagebrush. It was a place built for a family, but its emptiness hung heavy, like a song left unfinished. Caleb halted the wagon, the horses snorting as he climbed down. "This is it," he said, his voice low, not looking at Mara. He offered a hand to help her down, but she hesitated, clutching June tighter. Lila slid off first, her 12-year-old frame wiry but determined, and helped her sisters descend. Mara followed, her legs unsteady, and set June on the ground. The girl clung to her skirt, eyes wide as she stared at the cabin. "Is this home now, Mama?" Tessa asked, her 5-year-old voice barely a whisper. Mara's throat tightened. "For tonight, sweetheart," she said, smoothing Tessa's tangled hair. She glanced at Caleb, who was unhitching the horses, his movements deliberate, giving them space. Why had he brought them here? What did he want? Her mind raced with possibilities, each darker than the last, but she pushed them down. Her girls needed shelter, food, safety. For now, that was enough. Caleb led them inside, the door creaking on iron hinges. The cabin's interior was sparse but warm, smelling of pine and faintly of wood smoke. A stone hearth dominated one wall, embers glowing faintly. A rough-hewn table stood in the center, flanked by 6 chairs, their surfaces worn smooth by years of solitude. A single quilt, faded but clean, draped over a chair, and a shelf held a few books and a tin lantern. The girls huddled close to Mara, their eyes scanning the unfamiliar space. Caleb lit another lantern, its soft glow pushing back the shadows. "There's a loft for sleeping," he said, nodding toward a ladder in the corner. "Quilt's up there. I'll sleep in the barn." "Oh." Mara's suspicion flared. "You don't have to give up your home," she said, her voice sharper than intended. Caleb met her gaze, his gray eyes unreadable. "It's no trouble. You need rest more than I need a bed." His tone was matter-of-fact, but there was a gentleness beneath it that unsettled her. She nodded, unsure how to respond. The girls' stomachs growled, a reminder of the hunger that had driven her to steal. Caleb noticed, his jaw tightening. "I'll get supper," he said, moving to a small pantry. He returned with a pot of bean soup, stale bread, and a slab of butter. It wasn't much, but to Mara, it was a feast. She helped him set the table, her movements mechanical, watching her daughters' faces light up as the aroma filled the room. Lila portioned the soup carefully, giving June the largest share. Nora tore the bread into equal pieces, her 10-year-old hands steady despite her hollow cheeks. Ivy and Tessa sat close, their eyes flickering to Caleb, wary but curious. Mara sat last, her own hunger secondary to her need to see her girls fed. She watched them eat, each bite easing a knot in her chest. June's small fingers clutched a crust, her cheeks smudged with butter, and Mara's eyes stung with tears she refused to let fall. Caleb ate in silence, his gaze on his bowl, but Mara caught him watching the girls, his expression soft, almost pain. When June dropped her spoon, he retrieved it without a word, wiping it on his sleeve before handing it back. The gesture was small, but it struck Mara like a stone through glass. No one had shown her children kindness in months, not since Daniel's death left them adrift. She pushed the thought away, focusing on her daughter's soft chatter. Lila whispered to Nora about the loft. Ivy giggled when Tessa got broth on her chin, and June hummed a tuneless song, her fear momentarily forgotten. After supper, Caleb cleared the table, his movements slow, as if giving Mara time to adjust. She helped, needing to keep her hands busy. The girls sat by the hearth, their energy fading as the warmth lulled them. June toddled to Caleb, holding out her empty bowl. "More?" she asked, her voice a squeak. He knelt to her level, his large frame awkward but gentle. "All gone, little one," he said, his voice softer than Mara expected. June's lip trembled, and Mara braced for a tantrum. But Caleb reached into his pocket, pulling out a small wooden bird, crudely carved, but smooth. "Hold this instead," he said, placing it in her tiny hand. June's eyes widened, her fingers closing around it. "Bird," she whispered, clutching it to her chest. Mara froze, her heart lurching. The gesture was so simple, yet it cracked something inside her, a wall she'd built to keep her girls safe from a world that had only ever taken. She turned away, busying herself with stacking bowls, her throat tight. Caleb stood, brushing his hands on his pants. "I'll check the horses," he said, heading for the door. The lantern light caught the lines on his face, etched deep by years of loss. Mara realized he was older than she'd thought, maybe 40, his dark hair threaded with silver. The door closed behind him, leaving the cabin quiet save for the fire's crackle. Leela approached Mara, her voice low. "Is he good, Mama?" Mara hesitated, her instincts warring. "He saved us today," she said finally. "That's enough for now." Lila nodded, but her eyes were sharp, older than her years. Mara gathered the girls, leading them to the loft. The ladder was sturdy, the loft cramped but clean, with a straw mattress and a pile of quilts. She tucked them in, June still clutching the wooden bird, her sisters curling around her like petals closing for the night. Mara sang a lullaby, her voice shaky but steadying, until their breaths evened out. She descended the ladder, her body heavy with exhaustion but her mind restless. The cabin felt too big, too quiet without Caleb's presence. She stepped onto the porch, the night air cool against her skin. Caleb was in the corral, brushing a horse, his silhouette lit by moonlight. She watched him, trying to reconcile the man who'd faced down a sheriff with the one who'd carved a toy for her daughter. Her husband, Daniel, had been kind once, but his kindness had worn thin under hardship. Caleb's felt different, like a river running deep beneath stone, but she couldn't trust it, not yet. The door creaked behind her, and Sheriff Reed's voice startled her. Mara Tate. He stood in the yard, hat in hand, his horse tethered nearby. Her heart sank. "Sheriff," she said, stepping forward, her voice steady despite the fear clawing her chest. Caleb looked up, setting the brush down, and crossed the yard in long strides. "What's this about, Amos?" he asked, positioning himself between Mara and Reed. Reed's eyes flicked to Mara, then back to Caleb. "Just a word. Your stunt today don't erase her crime. Mercy's fine, but it blurs the law. Folks are talking." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Let them talk. She's paid enough." Reed's gaze hardened. "You sure you want her kind under your roof? She's got a past debts, trouble, might bring more than you bargained for." Mara's stomach twisted, her hands clenching. She wanted to protest, to defend herself, but fear for her girls kept her silent. Caleb stepped closer to Reed, his voice low. "She's got 5 children who need her. That's all I need to know. You got a problem, take it up with me." Reed stared, then mounted his horse. "Hope you know what you're doing, Harrow," he said, spurring the animal into the night. Mara exhaled, her knees weak. Caleb turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Get some rest," he said, heading for the barn. She nodded, but sleep felt far away. Back inside, she sat by the hearth, June's wooden bird on the table, its edges worn smooth. Mercy had saved them, but Mara knew it came with a costone she wasn't sure she could pay. The Wyoming sky darkened over Caleb Harrow's ranch, heavy clouds rolling in from the west, promising a storm. It was late September, the air sharp with the first bite of autumn, carrying the scent of damp earth and cedar. Mara Tate stood on the porch, her shawl pulled tight against the chill, watching her 5 daughters play in the yard. Lila, 12, led Nora, 10, and Ivy, 7, in a game of tag, their laughter fragile but real. Tessa, 5, sat cross-legged, braiding grass for June, 3, who clutched the wooden bird Caleb had carved, her small voice humming a tune. Mara's heart ached at the Scyther girls, alive, safe for now, but the shadow of Bitter Creek's gallows lingered, a weight she couldn't shake. Her wrists, still scabbed from the rope, itched under her sleeves, a reminder of how close she'd come to losing them. Inside the cabin, Caleb stoked the hearth, the fire's crackle filling the quiet. The past week had settled into an uneasy rhythm. Mara and the girls sleeping in the loft, Caleb in the barn, meals shared in cautious silence. Mara kept her distance, her gratitude for Caleb's mercy tempered by suspicion. Why had he risked so much for strangers? What did he expect in return? Yet his actions chopping wood, fixing the girl's torn shoes, leaving extra quilt shipped away at her defenses, leaving her raw and uncertain. Supper was simple, cornbread and stew from dried beef. The girls ate eagerly, their cheeks less hollow than before. Mara watched them, her own plate untouched, her mind tangled with memories of hunger and loss. Caleb sat at the table's end, his gray eyes on his food, but she caught him glancing at June, who nibbled her cornbread, crumbs dusting her chin. When Lila cleared the plates, Mara stood, needing to anchor herself. "I'll wash up," she said, her voice steady despite the storm brewing in her chest. Caleb nodded, rising to check the shutters as thunder rumbled in the distance. The girls settled by the hearth, Lila reading a worn primer to her sisters, her voice halting but proud. Mara scrubbed the dishes, the hot water stinging her hands, when Caleb returned, his boots heavy on the floorboards. "Storm's close," he said, hanging his hat. "I'll check the barn. You need anything?" His tone was gruff but kind, and Mara hesitated, the weight of her unspoken questions pressing down. She dried her hands, glancing at the girls, their heads bent over the book. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice low. Caleb's brow furrowed, but he nodded, stepping onto the porch. The air was thick, the first raindrops pattering on the roof. Mara crossed her arms, her shawl slipping. "You've given us a roof, food, more than I can repay," she began, her eyes on the darkening fields. "But I need to know why. You don't know me, Caleb. You don't know my past." Her voice cracked, and she hated the vulnerability it betrayed. Caleb leaned against the railing, his gaze distant. "Don't need to know your past to see you're a mother fighting for her kids," he said. "That's enough." Mara shook her head, her throat tight. "It's not that simple. You've got a town whispering, a sheriff watching. I bring trouble, Caleb. You deserve to know what kind." He met her eyes, his expression unreadable but steady, like a man who'd faced storms before. "Then tell me," he said, his voice soft but firm. Mara swallowed, her hands clenching. The words were heavy, buried deep, but silence felt like a betrayal of the man who'd saved her. "My husband, Daniel, died 2 years ago," she began, her voice barely above the rain. "A mine collapse in Colorado. Left us with nothing but a patch of land and debts. I sold what I could, moved us to Bitter Creek, thinking we'd start over. But the land was barren, the town cruel. We went hungry, Caleb, days without food, the girls crying themselves to sleep. I begged, worked odd jobs, but it wasn't enough. That's why I stole the bread. Not for me, for them." Tears welled, but she blinked them back, her jaw set. "I'd do it again, even knowing they'd hang me." Caleb's face softened, but he didn't speak, letting her words settle. Mara took a shaky breath. "There's more. Daniel had a partner, Jonas Creed. Cattle baron, rich as sin, mean as a rattler. He claimed Daniel owed him money, said the land was his by right. After Daniel died, Creed came calling, offering to help if I married him. I said no. He didn't take kindly to that. Sent men to scare, you storched our shed, poisoned our well. I ran with the girls, but he's got eyes everywhere. If he knows I'm here," her voice broke, fear clawing her chest. Caleb's jaw tightened, his hands gripping the railing. "He won't touch you here," he said, his voice low, a vow. Mara searched his face, wanting to believe him, but fear was an old companion. "You don't know him, Caleb. He's got money, power. He'll come for us." Caleb's eyes darkened, but before he could respond, hooves thudded in the distance. A rider emerged from the dusk, rain streaking his oilskin coat. Mara's heart lurched, her hand reaching for the door, ready to call the girls. Caleb stepped forward, his stance protective. The rider stopped short, dismounting. It was Sheriff Amos Reed, his mustache dripping, eyes sharp under his hat. "Harrow," he said, nodding, then glancing at Mara. "Mara Tate, got word you're settling in." His tone was neutral, but Mara's stomach twisted. Caleb crossed his arms. "What's your business, Amos?" Reed wiped rain from his face. "Talk, that's all. Town's buzzing about your charity. Some say it's noble, others say it's trouble. Figured I'd see for myself." Mara's fear hardened into defiance. "My girls are fed, safe. That's more than Bitter Creek ever gave them." Reed's eyes flicked to the cabin, where Lila's voice drifted through the open door, reading to her sisters. "Maybe so," he said, "but trouble follows you, Mara. Word's out, Jonas Creed's asking questions. Says you owe him land, money, maybe more. He's not the kind to let go." Mara's breath caught, her worst fears confirmed. Caleb stepped closer to Reed, his voice cold. "Creed's got no claim here. You tell him that." Reed raised a hand, placating. "I'm no messenger boy, just warning you. Creed's got men, influence. You're one man, Harrow, with a ranch and a soft heart. Think hard about what you're taking on." He mounted his horse, tipping his hat. "Stay sharp." The rain swallowed his hoofbeats as he rode off. Mara's knees weakened, but she stood tall, her nails digging into her palms. Caleb turned to her, his face a mix of resolve and worry. "He won't get near you," he said again. But the words felt thinner now, tested by Reed's warning. Inside, the girls were oblivious, their heads bent over the primer. Mara forced a smile, kneeling beside them. "Time for bed," she said, her voice steady for their sake. As they climbed to the loft, Lila lingered, her eyes sharp. "Was that the sheriff, Mama?" she asked. Mara nodded, brushing a strand from Lila's face. "Just checking on us. We're fine." Lila's gaze flickered to Caleb, who stood by the hearth, stoking the fire. "He's keeping us safe, isn't he?" Mara hesitated, then nodded. "For now he is." Once the girls were tucked in, Mara sat at the table, her hands trembling. Caleb joined her, setting a tin mug of coffee before her. "You don't have to face this alone," he said, his voice quiet but firm. Mara met his eyes, seeing the weight he carried, his own losses, his solitary life. "Why are you doing this, Caleb?" she asked, her voice raw. "You could have walked away." He looked down, his fingers tracing the mug's rim. 10 years ago, I lost someone. Sarah, my fiancée. Fever took her before we could build a life. I've been running from that ever since, but seeing you on that gallows, your girls crying, I couldn't walk away again." Mara's chest tightened, his honesty disarming her. She wanted to ask more, to understand the man who'd given her a lifeline, but the storm's roar outside mirrored her own turmoil. "Thank you," she whispered, the words inadequate, but all she had. Caleb nodded, rising. "Get some rest, we'll figure this out." He grabbed his coat, heading for the barn, leaving Mara alone with the fire's glow and the echo of his words. She climbed to the loft, lying beside her daughters, their soft breaths a fragile anchor. Lila stirred, whispering, "Mama, I'll help protect us." Mara kissed her forehead, her heart breaking and mending at once. "I know, baby," she said. The rain pounded the roof, and Mara lay awake, Creed's shadow looming larger than the storm. Caleb's promise held her steady, but she knew safety was fleeting, and the past was never far behind. Autumn settled over Caleb Harrow's Wyoming ranch like a quiet promise, the cedar groves blazing gold and crimson under a crisp October sky. The air carried the tang of frost and wood smoke, a reminder that winter loomed. Mara Tate stood in the cabin's kitchen, kneading dough for bread, her hands dusted with flour. Her daughter's laughter drifted through the open window, a sound that both warmed and unnerved her. Lila, 12, chased Nora, 10, across the yard, their boots kicking up dust. Ivy, 7, and Tessa, 5, built a fort from sticks, while June, 3, toddled after them, clutching the wooden bird Caleb had carved. Mara's heart swelled, but fear gnawed at its edges. 3 weeks had passed since Sheriff Reed's warning about Jonas Creed, and though the ranch felt like a sanctuary, she knew it was a fragile one. Inside, the cabin was a patchwork of new routines. Mara cooked and cleaned, her girls helping with small chores, while Caleb worked the land, his quiet presence a steady anchor. He'd given them more than a roof, new dresses sewn from old fabric, a milk cow for the girls, a sense of safety Mara hadn't known since Daniel's death. Yet she wrestled with her growing reliance on him. Every kind act, fixing Lila's torn coat, teaching Nora to whistle, felt like a debt she couldn't repay. Her feelings, too, were shifting, a dangerous warmth blooming when she watched him with her daughters. She pushed it down, focusing on survival, but the heart was a stubborn thing. Caleb entered, wiping sweat from his brow, his flannel shirt streaked with dirt. "Fence is mended," he said, setting his hat on the table. "Girls are keeping busy." Mara nodded, shaping the dough. "They're happy today," she said, her voice soft, testing the words. Caleb's gray eyes met hers, a flicker of something, pride, maybe, crossing his face. "Good, they deserve that." He hesitated, then added, "You're doing right by them, Mara." The compliment caught her off guard, her cheeks warming. She turned to the stove, hiding her flush. "I'm trying," she murmured. The morning passed in a rhythm of work and play. Caleb took Lila and Nora to check the corral, showing them how to hammer nails into loose boards. Their laughter echoed, Lila's serious nod mirroring Caleb's focus. Ivy and Tessa helped Mara churn butter, their small hands eager but clumsy. June sat at her feet, helping by stacking pebbles. Mara watched them, her chest tight with love and dread. This piece felt borrowed, and Creed's shadow loomed larger with each passing day. She'd seen his men before, hard-eyed riders who'd burned her shed in Colorado. If they found her here, Caleb's ranch would be no match for their malice. At noon, Mara called the girls for lunch bread, butter, and dried apples. They ate on the porch, the sun warm despite the chill. Caleb joined them, sitting on the steps, his plate balanced on his knee. June climbed into his lap, offering him a sticky apple slice. "For you, Mr. Cal," she said, her voice bright. Caleb's face softened, and he took it, ruffling her hair. "Thank you, little one," he said, his voice low. Mara's throat tightened, her eyes lingering on the scene. Her girls were opening to him, their wariness fading, but she couldn't let go of her own. The afternoon brought trouble. Mara was hanging laundry when she spotted smoke rising from the far end of the ranch. Her heart lurched, and she dropped the sheet, running toward the field. Caleb was already there, beating at flames, licking a small shed, his face grim. The girls followed Mara, their eyes wide. "Stay back!" Caleb shouted, his voice sharp with urgency. Mara grabbed a bucket, joining him, water sloshing as she doused the fire. The shed was lost, its timbers charred, but they saved the nearby fence. Coughing, Mara stumbled back, her hands trembling. Caleb's eyes scanned the horizon, his jaw tight. "This wasn't an accident," he said, kicking at the ashes. He found it then, a scrap of paper nailed to a post, the ink smudged, but clear. "You can't hide her forever." Mara's blood ran cold, her worst fears confirmed. Creed had found them. She clutched Tessa, who'd crept close, her small face pale. "Mama, who did this?" she whispered. Mara forced a calm she didn't feel. "No one we can't handle, sweetheart." But her eyes met Caleb's, and the weight of the threat pressed down. Lila stepped forward, her young face fierce. "We're not running again, are we?" Mara shook her head, her resolve hardening. "No, Lila, we're done running." Caleb led them back to the cabin, his silence heavy. Mara sent the girls inside, tasking Lila with reading to her sisters. She joined Caleb on the porch, her voice low. "This is my fault. I brought this to your door." Caleb's eyes flashed, a rare anger in them. "Don't say that. You didn't ask for Creed's greed. He's the one crossing lines." Mara's hands clenched. "But it's my girls in danger, Caleb. I can't stay if it means—" He cut her off, his voice firm. "You're not going anywhere. This is your home now, long as you need it." The words struck her, both a comfort and a challenge. She wanted to argue, to protect him from her past, but his resolve silenced her. That evening, a horse approached, its rider a woman in a dark cloak, Pastor Eliza Vance, the town's only preacher, her face lined but kind. Mara had seen her in Bitter Creek, praying quietly while others jeered at the gallows. Eliza dismounted, her eyes warm as she greeted Mara. "Heard you found a home here," she said, glancing at Caleb. "Thought I'd see how you're faring." Mara invited her in, grateful for a friendly face. The girls crowded around, Ivy offering a shy smile. Eliza knelt, admiring June's wooden bird, her presence easing the day's tension. Over coffee, Eliza revealed her purpose. "I've brought papers," she said, pulling a folded document from her satchel. "Guardianship forms. If you agree, Caleb can be named legal protector of your girls. It's not adoption, but it'll keep them safe from anyone trying to take them," Creed included. Mara's breath caught, her eyes flickering to Caleb. He nodded, his expression steady. "I'm willing, Mara. Means the law's on our side." The offer was a lifeline, but it tethered her to Caleb in ways she hadn't anticipated. Her heart raced, torn between gratitude and fear of dependence. Eliza explained the process. A judge in town could sign the forms, granting Caleb authority to act as guardian. It would shield the girls from Creed's legal threats, but Mara hesitated, her past whispering doubts. She'd trusted men before Daniel, even Creed briefly, and each had left her burned. Yet Caleb's actions spoke louder than promises. The shed he'd fought to save, the bird for June, the way he listened without pushing. She looked at her daughters, their faces bright in the firelight, and nodded. "Do it," she said, her voice firm. Eliza smiled, tucking the papers away. "I'll file them tomorrow. You're building something here, Mara. Hold fast." After Eliza left, the girls went to bed, their chatter softer, sensing change. Mara sat by the hearth, the guardianship papers on the table, a tangible hope. Caleb joined her, his presence a quiet strength. "You didn't have to do this," she said, her voice thick. "Take us in. Fight our battles." He looked at her, his eyes soft but intense. "I know, but I want to." The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Mara's heart stirred, a dangerous longing she couldn't name. She thought of the girls, how Lila helped Nora with chores, how Ivy's laughter was louder now. They were healing, and Caleb was part of it. That night, Mara lay in the loft, her daughter's breaths a soft rhythm. June stirred, murmuring Mr. Cal in her sleep, the wooden bird under her cheek. Mara's chest ached, a mix of love and fear. Creed's note burned in her mind, a promise of worse to come. She thought of running, sparing Caleb the danger, but the girl's faces happy, trusting held her still. Caleb's vow echoed, "This is your home." For the first time, she let herself believe it might be true, even as the fire's glow flickered, casting shadows that whispered of battles yet to come. Winter crept into Wyoming's Bitter Creek Valley, the November air sharp with frost, the plains blanketed in a thin layer of snow. Caleb Harrow's ranch stood resolute against the cold, its cabin glowing with lamplight, a fragile beacon in the vast darkness. Mara Tate stood at the kitchen window, her breath fogging the glass as she watched the horizon, where cedars swayed under a leaden sky. Her daughters slept in the loft. Lila, Nora, Ivy, Tessa, and June, their soft breaths a quiet comfort. Yet Mara's heart pounded, her nerves frayed by weeks of waiting for Jonas Creed's next move. The burned shed and its threatening note, "You can't hide her," forever haunted her, a reminder that safety was a fleeting illusion. Her hands, rough from chores, trembled as she clutched her shawl, the weight of her past pressing down. Caleb worked outside, his figure blurred by falling snow, reinforcing the barn's walls. The guardianship papers, filed by Pastor Eliza Vance, had given Mara hope, but Creed's silence since the fire felt ominous, like the hush before a blizzard. She turned from the window, busying herself with mending Leela's coat, her needle moving mechanically. The girls had adapted to ranch life, their laughter louder, their steps surer. Caleb was their anchor, teaching them to feed the horses, carving toys for June, listening to Ivy's halting stories. Mara's feelings for him had deepened, a quiet ache she couldn't name, but fear kept her silent. To love was to risk losing, and she'd lost too much already. The day passed in a tense rhythm. Mara baked biscuits, the girls helping with flour-dusted hands, their chatter a balm. Caleb joined them for supper, his presence steady but distracted, his eyes scanning the windows. "Snow's thickening," he said, breaking the silence. "I'll check the stock before dark." Mara nodded, her stomach knotting. She wanted to ask him to stay, to admit the fear gnawing at her, but pride held her back. The girls cleared the table, Lila's sharp eyes catching Mara's unease. "We're safe here, right, Mama?" she asked, her 12-year-old voice seeking certainty. Mara forced a smile. "As safe as we can be, sweetheart." Night fell, the cabin cocooned in snow, the fire's crackle the only sound. Mara tucked the girls into the loft, June clutching her wooden bird, murmuring Mr. Cal in her sleep. Mara lingered, kissing each forehead, her heart heavy with love and dread. Downstairs, she sat by the hearth, mending a quilt, when a sharp crack shattered the quiet, a window breaking in the back room. Her blood ran cold, the needle slipping from her fingers. Footsteps crunched outside, deliberate and close. She grabbed a kitchen knife, her pulse roaring, and crept toward the sound, her body coiled with defiance. Caleb burst through the door, snow dusting his coat, a rifle in his hands. "Get the girls," he whispered, his voice low and urgent. Mara nodded, racing to the loft, her heart in her throat. She woke Lila first, pressing a finger to her lips. "Quiet, baby. Behind the hearth now." Lila's eyes widened, but she obeyed, gathering her sisters. Mara herded them down, their small bodies trembling as they crouched behind the stone hearth, June's bird clutched tight. The girl's fear mirrored her own, but Mara's grip on the knife steadied her. She'd faced Creed's men before. She'd face them again. Caleb stood by the broken window, rifle raised, his silhouette taut against the firelight. A figure stepped into the open, a young man, no older than 25, his face clean-shaven but hard, a revolver aimed lazily. "Drop it, Harrow," he sneered, his voice sharp with bravado. "Creed sends his regards." Caleb didn't flinch, his rifle steady. "You're on my land," he said, his tone cold as the snow outside. "Leave or you won't." The intruder laughed, stepping closer. "You gonna shoot with them kids watching? Brave man." Mara's breath caught, her knife hidden in her skirt. She edged closer, ready to strike if Caleb faltered. The girls huddled silently, Lila's arm around June, their eyes wide but trusting. Caleb took a step forward, placing himself between the intruder and the hearth. "Last chance," he said, his voice a growl. The man tilted his head, smirking. "Creed says you're meddling. Keep it up, he'll send men who don't miss." Caleb fired, the shot splintering the floor beside the man's boot, the sound deafening. In a blur, Caleb lunged, wrenching the revolver away and dragging the intruder outside, slamming him into the snow. Mara followed, knife in hand, her heart pounding. Caleb pinned the man, his voice low and lethal. "Tell Creed this family's off limits. I see you again, I bury you." The intruder scrambled up, his bravado gone, and fled into the storm, his coat flapping. Caleb stood, rifle lowered, his breath visible in the cold. Mara's knees weakened, but she stayed upright, the knife still clutched tight. "You hurt?" Caleb asked, turning to her, his eyes searching. She shook her head, her voice failing. He nodded, guiding her inside, his hand brushing her arm, a fleeting warmth. The girls emerged, their faces pale but brave. Lila hugged Mara, whispering, "You kept us safe." Mara held them close, her fear giving way to fierce resolve. Caleb barred the broken window, his movements deliberate, but Mara saw the tension in his shoulders. "He'll come again," she said, her voice steady despite the dread pooling in her chest. Caleb met her gaze. "Let him try. We're ready." The words were a vow, but Mara knew the cost of such promises. Morning brought a visitor, Ruth Carver, a lawyer Eliza Vance had summoned, her boots caked with snow as she dismounted. A tall woman with steel-gray hair and a no-nonsense air, Ruth carried a satchel of papers, her eyes sharp with purpose. Over coffee, she spread documents on the table, her voice crisp. "Creed's claiming your late husband's land, Mara. Says Daniel signed it over. But I've got proof he forged the deed. Ink's wrong, signatures don't match. We can fight this in court." Mara's heart lifted, a spark of hope amidst the fear. "Will it stop him?" she asked. Ruth's gaze was steady. "It'll hurt him, but men like Creed don't stop easy." The girls listened from the hearth, their faces serious. Lila approached, her young voice firm. "We're not leaving, are we?" Ruth smiled, a rare softness. "Not if I can help it, child." She outlined the plan: a court hearing in Bitter Creek, with Caleb as guardian and Mara as witness. The evidence letters, ledgers, Daniel's original deed could expose Creed's lies. Mara nodded, her resolve hardening. She'd fight for her girls, for this home, no matter the cost. That afternoon, Creed struck again. Mara was fetching water when smoke rose from the barn, flames licking its walls. Caleb shouted, rallying the girls to safety as he ran toward the blaze. Mara grabbed buckets, her fear swallowed by action. The girls watched, wide-eyed, as Caleb plunged into the barn, emerging with his carving tools, his arms singed, soot streaking his face. The barn was lost, its timbers collapsing, but the house stood untouched. Mara's heart pounded as she reached Caleb, her hands trembling. "You could have died," she said, her voice breaking. Caleb's eyes met hers, raw and unguarded. "Couldn't let it all burn," he said, his voice hoarse. Mara's fingers brushed his burned hands, her touch lingering as she bandaged them, the air thick with unspoken truths. "I can't lose you too," she whispered, her heart laid bare. The words slipped out, a confession she hadn't meant to voice, but they felt right, inevitable. Caleb's gaze softened, a quiet intensity in his eyes, but he didn't speak, the moment too fragile. That night, Mara sat by the girls, their small bodies curled around her. June's bird lay beside her, a symbol of Caleb's care. Mara's love for him crystallized, a fierce, terrifying thing. She'd loved Daniel, but this was different, born of shared battles, quiet kindness, a man who stood between her and the storm. Yet fear lingered. Creed's men, the court, the fragility of this life. She looked at the girls, their faces peaceful in sleep, and vowed to fight, not just for them, but for the man who'd given them everything. The storm had broken, but the war was far from over, and Mara would face it with a heart both broken and whole. The December wind howled through Bitter Creek, Wyoming, rattling the windows of the small courthouse as snow piled against its weathered walls. Inside, Mara Tate sat rigid on a wooden bench, her hands clasped tight to still their trembling. Her 5 daughters, Lila, 12, Nora, 10, Ivy, 7, Tessa, 5, and June, 3 sat beside her, their faces solemn, dressed in their best, though the dresses were patched and faded. Mara's heart pounded, her shawl, a thin shield against the chill of fear. Today, they faced Jonas Creed in court, a man whose greed had haunted her since her husband's death. The barn fire, the intruder, the forged deed saw, led to this moment, where her family's future hung in the balance. She glanced at Caleb Harrow, seated nearby, his broad shoulders tense under his cleanest flannel shirt. His gray eyes met hers, steady and resolute, and she drew strength from the silent promise in them. The courtroom was cramped, its air thick with the scent of damp wool and anticipation. Townsfolk filled the benches, their whispers a low, humsome, curious, others judgmental. Mara felt their eyes, the same eyes that had watched her on the gallows months ago, but she held her chin high. She wasn't the thief they'd condemned anymore. She was a mother fighting for her children, bolstered by Caleb's mercy and Ruth Carver's legal prowess. Ruth, the steel-haired lawyer, stood at a table piled with papers, her posture unyielding. Across the room, Jonas Creed lounged, his tailored coat and slicked hair a stark contrast to the rough-hewn crowd. His cold blue eyes flicked to Mara, a smirk curling his lips, and her stomach twisted. He thought he'd win, thought his money and power could steal her girls. Judge Amos Leeds, an old friend of Caleb's, entered, his white beard stark against his black robes. His sharp eyes scanned the room, softening briefly as they landed on Caleb. "Order!" he called, his voice cutting through the murmurs. The hearing began, and Ruth took the floor, her voice crisp and commanding. "Your Honor, Jonas Creed claims Mara Tate's late husband, Daniel, signed over their land. We have evidence proving forgery-altered signatures, mismatched ink, and letters where Creed admits to coercion." She presented a ledger, its pages marked with Daniel's careful script and a forged deed, the ink smudged and uneven. The crowd leaned forward, intrigued, as Ruth built her case with surgical precision. Creed's lawyer, a wiry man named Hargrove, countered with a sneer. "Mara Tate is unfit, a thief, a beggar, barely keeping those girls alive. Mr. Creed offers stability, a proper home." Mara's hands clenched, her nails digging into her palms. Lila reached for her hand, her young face fierce, and Mara squeezed back, drawing strength from her daughter's courage. Ruth didn't flinch. Mara Tate stole bread to feed her children, a desperate act in a town that turned its back. She's proven her devotion, and Caleb Harrow's guardianship ensures their safety. She handed the judge the guardianship papers, signed by Pastor Eliza Vance, their ink fresh but binding. Caleb took the stand next, his boots heavy on the floorboards. He stood tall, his voice low but clear, each word weighted with conviction. "I took Mara and her girls in because they needed help," he said, his eyes on the judge. "I've given them a home, food, protection. They're not just safe, they're thriving." Leeds leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "Why, Caleb? You're a solitary man, no kin to them. What's your stake?" Caleb's gaze flickered to Mara, then to the girls, and a quiet intensity softened his features. "Because I know what it's like to be needed and have no one answer. They're not mine by blood, but they're mine in every way that matters." Mara's throat tightened, her heart swelling with an emotion she could no longer deny. The girls stirred, June clutching her wooden bird, her wide eyes fixed on Caleb. The crowd murmured, some nodding, others skeptical, but Caleb's words carried a raw honesty that silenced Hargrove's objections. Ruth called Mara next, and she rose, her legs unsteady but her resolve ironclad. She took the stand, her voice trembling at first but growing stronger. "I had nothing when they dragged me to the gallows," she said, her eyes sweeping the room. "No land, no money, just my girls. I stole to keep them alive, and I'd do it again. But I never stopped being their mother, and Caleb gave us a chance to be a family again." Her words hung in the air, raw and unyielding, and Mara saw tears in a woman's eyes in the crowd, a flicker of shame on another's face. Creed's smirk faltered, his fingers tapping restlessly. Leeds asked, "And Creed's claim? What's your history with him?" Mara swallowed, her voice steady. "He wanted our land after my husband died. When I refused him, he turned cruel, burned our shed, scared my girls. He's no savior, he's a thief in a fine coat." The crowd gasped, and Ruth presented a letter, Creed's own words boasting of securing the land by any means. Hargrove objected, but Leeds silenced him, his eyes narrowing as he studied the evidence. The hearing stretched into the afternoon, the snow outside thickening. Ruth's closing argument was a blade, sharp and precise. "This isn't about property or poverty," she said, her voice ringing. "It's about a mother who chose her daughters over pride, a man who gave them shelter when the world gave stones, and a bully who thinks wealth buys people. It doesn't." She sat, her eyes daring Creed to respond. Hargrove sputtered, but his arguments crumbled under the weight of Ruth's evidence. Leeds retired to deliberate, the room falling silent save for the wind's howl. Mara held Tessa close, June in her lap, the girl's warmth grounding her. Lila whispered, "We're staying, right, Mama?" Mara nodded, her voice soft. "We're fighting, baby. Caleb sat beside them, his presence a quiet fortress. Hours passed, the girls dozing against Mara, their trust a weight and a gift. When Leeds returned, his face was weary but resolute. He handed Ruth a folded paper, his voice clear. Mara Tate retains full custody. Caleb Harrow's guardianship stands. No one can challenge without due cause. Mara's knees buckled, but Caleb caught her arm, his touch steadying her. "Thank you," she whispered, tears spilling over. The crowd erupted in murmurs, some approving, others grudging. Creed stormed out, his face dark, muttering to Hargrove about other ways. Mara's heart clenched, but the victory held her upright. Outside, the snow fell in thick curtains, and Caleb led them to the wagon, his arm brushing Mara's as he helped the girls climb in. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, the girls' relief palpable, June humming softly. Mara's mind raced, Creed's threat lingered, but the law was on their side, and Caleb was with her. That night, the cabin glowed with firelight. The girls sprawled by the hearth, drawing on scraps of paper. Mara stood on the porch, the stars piercing the cleared sky, her shawl tight against the cold. Caleb joined her, his breath visible, his eyes searching hers. "We won today," he said, his voice low. Mara nodded, her heart full and fragile. "Because of you," she said, her voice breaking. "You didn't just save us, Caleb. You gave us a home." His gaze softened, and he stepped closer, the space between them charged. Mara's fear melted, replaced by a truth she couldn't hold back. "I love you," she whispered, the words raw, terrifying, but right. Caleb's eyes widened, a quiet wonder crossing his face. "Mara," he said, his voice thick, "I've loved you since I saw you fight for them on that gallows." He cupped her face, his calloused hands gentle, and kissed her, soft but sure, under the starlit sky. Mara leaned into him, her heart open, the world falling away. Inside, the girls stirred, Lila peeking out. "Mama," she called, her voice curious. Mara smiled, taking Caleb's hand, leading him in. The girls gathered, their eyes bright. June toddled to Caleb, tugging his sleeve. "Pa, read to us?" she asked, her voice small but certain. Caleb froze, his throat working, and Mara's heart swelled. Lila grinned, nodding, and the others echoed, "Pa." Caleb knelt, pulling June close, his voice rough. "Anything for you, little one." Mara watched, tears falling as Caleb read. The girls curled around him, their family sealed not by blood, but by choice. Creed's shadow lingered, but tonight, love was stronger, a fire no storm could douse. Spring burst across Wyoming's Bitter Creek Valley, the plains awash in wildflowers, their vibrant purples and yellows a stark contrast to the snows of winter. Caleb Harrow's ranch hummed with life, the cedar groves lush, the rebuilt barn standing proud against a sky of endless blue. Mara Tate stood on the porch, her hands cradling a mug of coffee, the warmth seeping into her fingers. Her daughters Lila, 12, Nora, 10, Ivy, 7, Tessa, 5, and June, threerin' through the pasture, their laughter weaving with the breeze. June chased a butterfly, her wooden bird tucked in her pocket, while Lila led the others in a game of chase, their patched dresses fluttering. Mara's heart swelled, the scars of the gallows and Jonas Creed's threats fading like a bad dream. Yet a quiet vigilance lingered, a mother's instinct honed by battles fought and won. Inside, the cabin bore the marks of their life together. A new shelf held books and carved toys, gifts from Caleb to the girls. A quilt, stitched by Mara and Lila, draped over a chair, its colors bright against the weathered wood. Caleb was in the barn, his hammer ringing as he finished a cradle surprise for a neighbor's newborn, a gesture of the kindness that defined him. Mara's love for him had deepened since their confession under the stars, a steady flame that warmed her even on restless nights. The guardianship papers had secured their family, but Creed's vow of revenge haunted her, a shadow she couldn't fully shake. The past months had been a delicate dance of healing and preparation. After the courtroom victory, Caleb had doubled the ranch's defenses, reinforcing fences and keeping his rifle close. Mara taught the girls to read by lamplight, their halting words a testament to their resilience. Yet Creed's silence was unnerving, his absence more threatening than his attacks. Mara set her mug down, her eyes scanning the horizon. She'd learned to trust Caleb's strength, but the cost of their peace weighed heavy. Every scar on his hands, every sleepless night, a debt she could never repay. Mid-morning brought a courier, a young man on a lathered horse, his satchel bulging. Mara met him at the gate, her heart quickening as he handed her a sealed envelope, no return address. "From the county," he said, tipping his hat before riding off. She carried it inside, her fingers trembling, the memory of Creed's threats sharp. Caleb joined her, wiping sawdust from his hands, his gray eyes narrowing at her expression. "What is it?" he asked, his voice low. Mara hesitated, then broke the seal, unfolding a single sheet. Her breath caught as she read, her voice faltering. "It's about Creed. He's been arrested. Conspiracy, forgery, arson, 10 years, minimum." Caleb took the paper, his jaw tightening as he scanned it. "How?" he asked, his tone sharp with disbelief. Mara's eyes flicked to the letters. Details: a raid on Creed's hunting cabin, confessions from his hired men, evidence tying him to the barn fire. "You did this," she said, realization dawning. Caleb's silence confirmed it. She remembered his late-night rides, his quiet talks with Sheriff Reed. "You tracked them," she said, her voice thick. "You made sure he'd pay." Caleb met her gaze, his expression resolute but weary. "Couldn't wait for him to come again. Not with you and the girls here." Mara's throat tightened, gratitude and love overwhelming her. She reached for his hand, her fingers tracing the burns from the barn fire, now healed but scarred. "You didn't have to," she whispered. Caleb squeezed her hand, his voice soft. "Yes, I did. You're my family." The word family settled deep, a truth forged through fire and faith. Mara leaned into him, her head against his chest, his heartbeat a steady anchor. The girls' laughter drifted through the open door, and for the first time Mara let herself believe the worst was over. That afternoon, another visitor arrived, a federal clerk, sent to confirm the adoption papers filed after the guardianship. Mara welcomed him inside, the girls offering biscuits, their manners polished by months of stability. June presented a dandelion, her smile bright, and the clerk, a stern man with wire-rimmed glasses, softened. He walked the ranch, noting the new barn, the vegetable garden, the names carved on the porch beam: Lila, Nora, Ivy, Tessa, June. "This is a home," he said, his pen scratching in his notebook. "You've built something worth keeping." He left with few questions, his approval a quiet victory. The adoption was finalized a week later. Judge Leeds, his beard whiter than ever, signed the papers in Bitter Creek's courthouse, his eyes warm as he handed them to Mara. "They're yours now, forever," he said, glancing at Caleb. Mara nodded, tears spilling over, her fingers tracing the girls' names on the document. Lila hugged her tight, whispering, "No one can take us now, Mama." June climbed into Caleb's lap, calling him Pa with a grin, and the others echoed, their voices a chorus of trust. Mara's heart ached with joy, the weight of the gallows finally lifting. The wedding came soon after, a simple affair at the mission chapel, its wooden pews filled with wildflowers the girls had gathered. Mara wore a braid and a clean dress, her face radiant despite the lack of finery. Caleb stood tall in his best shirt, his gray eyes fixed on her, a quiet wonder in his gaze. The girls, in dresses too light for the spring chill, scattered petals, their giggles filling the air. Pastor Eliza Vance officiated, her voice gentle as she pronounced them man and wife. Caleb kissed Mara before the words were finished, his lips soft but sure, and the small crowd neighbors who'd once shunned Mara clapped, their faces warm with respect. Back at the ranch, the days wove into a tapestry of small joys. Mara taught the girls to knit, their clumsy stitches improving with each try. Caleb showed them how to plant corn, his hands guiding theirs in the soft earth. Evenings were for stories, Caleb's deep voice reading by the hearth, June correcting him when he skipped a line. Mara found peace in these moments. But one task remained. Late one night, she found a letter from Daniel, tucked in an old trunk, its ink faded but clear. "Keep living, Mara. For them." She read it by candlelight, her tears falling, then burned it in the hearth, the ashes a release. She chose this life, this love, without regret. The community began to shift, neighbors nodding respectfully when Mara passed in town. The baker, Hollis, offered a loaf with a gruff apology, and Mara accepted, her smile genuine. The girls thrived, Lila reading fluently, Nora sketching flowers, Ivy singing off-key. Tessa learned her letters, and June, ever bold, declared she'd be a rancher like Pa. Mara watched them, her heart full, the ranch no longer just a refuge but a home, its walls holding their laughter, their dreams. One evening, Mara walked the pasture, June asleep against her shoulder, the sunset casting gold over the land. Caleb joined her, his arm slipping around her waist. "Dinner's ready," he said, his voice warm. "Clara made it. Says you deserve a rest." Mara laughed, the sound free and light. "That'll be the day." They walked to the cabin, the girls' voices spilling out, the table set with wild mint in a jar. Mara took her seat, Caleb beside her, their hands linked under the table. The girls folded their hands, and Mara closed her eyes, her prayer simple but profound. "Thank you for this family, for love we never thought we'd find." They ate, laughed, and lived, the meal a celebration of survival and grace. Later, on the porch, Mara leaned against Caleb, the stars bright above. June stirred inside, calling, "Pa, read." Caleb smiled, squeezing Mara's hand. "Shall we?" he asked. She nodded, and they went in, the fire glowing as Caleb read, the girls curled close, their family whole. Mara stood in the doorway, watching, her heart no longer heavy but light, a love built to last, forged not just in mercy but in the quiet, daily choices of a life reclaimed. As the Wyoming stars blanketed Caleb and Mara's ranch, their family stood on the porch, the girls' laughter mingling with the night's soft hum. Mara rested against Caleb, her heart full, the scars of the gallows and Creed's threats now distant echoes. Their journey from the noose's shadow to a home built on mercy taught a timeless lesson. Love, forged in sacrifice and resilience, can triumph over even the darkest trials. Mara and Caleb's story reminds us that kindness, when offered without expectation, can heal broken lives and weave bonds stronger than blood. It's a call to choose compassion over judgment, to stand for those who've lost everything, and to believe that second chances can bloom in the harshest landscapes. Let their tale inspire us to act with courage, to protect the vulnerable, and to cherish the families we build, by choice or by fate. Their love, etched in daily acts of care, proves that even in a wild, unforgiving world, hope endures. For more stories of grit and grace, subscribe to Wild West Love Tales on YouTube, where the frontier's heart beats strong. Drop a comment with the number 8, symbolizing eternal love, and share how this story touched you. Let's keep the fire of these tales burning bright.